I'm gonna tell you something. If you two never bother with me again in the rest of my life, I ain't giving up that stuff. I can't. There's good friends of mine on the page. Well, he could boss you have to do what he tells you.
You see, that's why I said to you before, you don't understand what the boss you mean, but the boss is your boss. Understand?
Angelo Salvatore Ruggiero Sr., infamously known by the nickname Quack Quack, was a notorious figure in the criminal underworld of America. As a trusted associate of the Gambino crime family, Ruggiero became closely allied with one of its most infamous leaders, John Gotti. Their friendship would eventually catapult Ruggiero into a position of power when Gotti ascended to the top of the family's hierarchy. Recognizing his loyalty, Gotti made Ruggiero a capo regime, entrusting him with overseeing various operations. However, Ruggiero's rise within the organization came despite his notable shortcomings. While he had the street cred and connections necessary for such a role, his organizational abilities and capacity to generate significant income were questionable at best. Still, within the dangerous world of organized crime, it was considered perilous to openly challenge his rank, making any criticism of his leadership position almost taboo. The FBI, however, took a different view. They saw Ruggiero as a volatile figure, a man prone to outbursts of unpredictable violence. His erratic behavior and extreme unpredictability led them to label him a dangerous individual, one who seemed incapable of engaging in any rational confrontation. To law enforcement, he was nothing short of a ticking time bomb, a man who could turn on anyone at any moment without warning. Ruggiero's fate, however, was sealed during a tense period when John Gotti faced pretrial detention for a state case, which he ultimately triumphed in. During this time, Ruggiero stepped in as Gotti's liaison to the family, trying to maintain control and order while his boss was behind bars. But his brash nature got the better of him when, during a court hearing, he lashed out, cursing and arguing with the judge. This reckless behavior led to his own imprisonment, right alongside Gotti. This incident was more than just a minor outburst. It marked the end of Ruggiero's chances to rise any further within the Gambino family, effectively quashing any hope he had of ever becoming Gotti's underboss. Angelo Salvatore Ruggiero, a key figure in the notorious underworld of Brooklyn, was born at Lutheran Hospital and raised in the gritty East New York neighborhood. His father, a first-generation immigrant from Naples, Italy, steered clear of organized crime, while his mother, Mary Della Croce, had deep ties to the criminal world. Ruggiero's family was immersed in the underworld, with his older brother Salvatore Ruggiero Sr. having connections to the Gambino crime family, and his younger brother, John Ruggiero, born on June 9, 1946, also caught in the web of criminality. Ruggiero's cousin, Angelo Della Croce, served as the Gambino family's underboss, while his nephew, Salvatore Ruggiero Jr., was also involved in organized crime. Alongside his cousins, he had family connections to Sean and Shannon Connolly, whose ties to the mob further rooted Ruggiero in this dangerous world. Growing up in East New York, Ruggiero's early life was closely intertwined with that of future Gambino boss John Gotti and the infamous underboss Sammy Gravano. Together, they navigated a path that led them deeper into the criminal underbelly of New York City. Despite his family's criminal legacy, Ruggiero dropped out of high school, which marked the beginning of his rough and tumultuous life. During the 1950s, he was arrested on a number of charges, including street fighting, public intoxication, car theft, bookmaking, illegal firearm possession, and burglary. Many of these arrests occurred while he was in the company of his lifelong friend Gotti. One of the more memorable run-ins with the law took place in 1966 when Ruggiero and Gotti were arrested together for attempting to steal a cement mixer truck, a bold and reckless crime that would become a notable chapter in their shared history. This early pattern of criminal activity set the stage for Ruggiero's eventual rise within the Gambino crime family, further cementing his place in the world of organized crime. On May 22, 1973, a violent act of betrayal took place at a Staten Island bar where mobster James McBratney was shot and killed by a group consisting of Gambino family members, including John Gotti, his associate Salvatore Sammy Ruggiero, and hitman Ralph Gallioni. McBratney's fate was sealed after he attempted to kidnap a prominent Gambino loan shark in a failed ransom scheme, an act that infuriated the family's leadership. The Gambinos swiftly decided that McBratney had to be silenced, leading to his execution. Both Gotti and Ruggiero were arrested and later convicted of manslaughter, facing significant prison time as a result of the mob hit. However, their story didn't end behind bars. After serving their sentences, Gotti and Ruggiero were released on parole in July 1977, and their influence within the Gambino family grew rapidly. In a secretive and highly significant ceremony, they were inducted as made men, formally welcomed into the inner circle of the powerful crime family. The ceremony was presided over by the Gambino family boss, Paul Castellano, along with consigliere Joseph N. Gallo and underboss Della Croce. Law enforcement sources later suggested that Ruggiero and Gotti's rise within the organization was not just due to their criminal actions, but also due to the deep personal connection and loyalty that Della Croce felt towards them. This connection helped propel them into positions of considerable power within the family. In an effort to comply with his parole restrictions, Ruggiero held a no-show job at Arc Plumbing and Heating Corporation, a front company owned by Gambino associates Anthony and Cesar Guarino. Despite his legal obligations, Ruggiero's involvement in the underworld was undeniable. His criminal activities were suspected to include the 1980 disappearance of John Favara, a neighbor who had tragically killed Gotti's young son Frank in a car accident. Ruggiero's most notable and deadly contribution came in 1985, when he played a significant role in the assassination of Paul Castellano, the head of the Gambino family. This high-profile murder marked a turning point in the power dynamics within the Mafia, further cementing Ruggiero's position as a feared and influential figure in the New York underworld. Ruggiero eventually found himself under the scrutiny of a covert government investigation, a turning point that would play a pivotal role in his downfall. The operation was spearheaded by Wilfred Johnson, a former mobster who had turned government informant. Johnson, eager to assist authorities, provided agents with an intricate layout of Ruggiero's home, which allowed them to secretly install 4 listening devices and wiretaps. With these tools in place, investigators closely monitored Ruggiero's involvement in the narcotics trade, capturing vital information about his criminal activities. As the investigation deepened, authorities were able to record conversations between Ruggiero and Gene Gotti, which ultimately linked the two men to the murder of Gambino crime boss Paul Castellano. Ruggiero's family connections ran deep within the Gambino crime syndicate, particularly through his uncle, Angelo Della Croce. Della Croce, one of the original supporters of the notorious mob boss Albert Anastasia, had risen to the position of underboss under Carlo Gambino, Anastasia's successor. Before his death, Gambino made the decision to name Paul Castellano as his successor, with Della Croce remaining as underboss. Although Della Croce was publicly discontent with this choice, he supported Castellano out of respect for family unity. Despite this outward loyalty, many insiders believed that Della Croce was far closer to John Gotti, who had risen through the ranks with his own ambitions. This dynamic would later create tension between Della Croce and Ruggiero, particularly when Ruggiero's associate, Peter Tambone, was arrested for narcotics trafficking. Della Croce, fiercely opposed to any drug activity within the family, made it clear that anyone involved in the heroin trade, including Ruggiero and Gotti, would face severe consequences. In a desperate bid to save Tambone from Della Croce's wrath, Ruggiero instructed his associate to deny any involvement in the heroin itself, claiming instead that he was only responsible for laundering the drug money. This move was an attempt to navigate the deadly tension within the family and protect his associate from the unforgiving wrath of a man who valued loyalty above all else. After receiving the devastating news about his uncle's terminal cancer diagnosis, Paul Castellano took swift and drastic action to safeguard his family's operations. He issued an unyielding decree that any family member born after 1962 would be strictly forbidden from involvement in narcotics under penalty of death. This was not merely an internal family matter, but part of a broader effort to consolidate power within the American Mafia. Castellano pressured the Mafia Commission to extend this new policy to the entire organization, enforcing an immediate death sentence for anyone caught trafficking drugs. His decision was pointedly aimed at high-profile figures like John Gotti, Ruggiero, and Della Croce, who Castellano had begun to suspect were not only tolerating, but secretly backing Gotti's expanding narcotics empire. Castellano viewed these actions as part of a broader political strategy to undercut the rising influence of Gotti and his allies. He hoped these aggressive moves would stifle the rapid rise of Ruggiero and Gotti, whose ambitions were beginning to threaten Castellano's grip on power within the family. Meanwhile, Ruggiero grew increasingly vocal about the lack of financial reward from his illicit activities, expressing dissatisfaction with his earnings from the family's illegal operations. Despite his grumbling, both Ruggiero and Gotti appeared outwardly unconcerned by the looming legal troubles surrounding them. The authorities had been listening closely to their conversations at the Ravenite Social Club, tapping the phones and gathering enough evidence to issue a grand jury subpoena for Ruggiero, Gotti, and 10 others involved in the club's activities. This subpoena was a direct result of Operation Acorn, a successful law enforcement operation designed to expose organized crime activities. However, despite the mounting legal pressure, Ruggiero and Gotti seemed unfazed, perhaps overly confident in their ability to navigate the dangers surrounding them. John Carniglia, a capo in the notorious Gambino crime family, frequently vented his frustrations about Angelo Ruggiero to fellow criminals, often complaining, "Dial any 7 numbers and there's a 50-50 chance that Angelo will pick up the phone." Ruggiero's presence, it seemed, was ubiquitous, and his reputation for being constantly available, or perhaps overexposed, was well known among his associates. Every other Sunday, Ruggiero would make the drive to the home of family boss Paul Castellano in the upscale Todd Hill neighborhood of Staten Island. There, Ruggiero would report on the activities of the Bergen crew, detailing the hijackings and gambling operations that were bringing in profits. Despite his role as Castellano's trusted informant, Ruggiero was far from loyal in his personal assessments of the boss. At home, Ruggiero often disparaged Castellano's leadership style, mocking him as a milk drinker and a pansy, implying weakness and ineffectiveness. He went so far as to belittle Castellano's sons, who managed the family's poultry business, calling them the chicken men. The business advisors surrounding Castellano were no safer from his mockery, as he derisively referred to them as the Jew Club. Ruggiero's scorn extended to Thomas Gambino, a key figure overseeing the family's interests in the garment district, whom he called a sissy dressmaker. He even conjured up crude and inappropriate images of Castellano and underboss Thomas Bellotti, spending their evenings together at Tot Hill, saying they were whacking off, a comment that reflected his disdain for their closeness. However, the power dynamics within the Gambino family were about to shift dramatically. On December 16, 1985, just 2 weeks after the death of influential consigliere Agnello della Croce, Castellano and Bellotti were brutally gunned down outside Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan, leaving the family in turmoil. With Castellano's death, John Gotti seized control of the Gambino family, becoming its new boss. Under Gotti's leadership, the family's operations shifted. Gotti, preferring to stay above the fray, no longer handled the gritty details of contract killings personally. Instead, he delegated that responsibility to Ruggiero, cementing his role as one of the family's most trusted and feared figures. Ruggiero often spoke ill of John Gotti behind his back, with his complaints being captured on FBI wiretaps. He referred to Gotti as a sick motherfucker, criticizing his constant chatter, calling it a fucking mouth that goes a mile a minute. Ruggiero also expressed frustration with Gotti's behavior, accusing him of abusing and talking about people in an unjust manner, and claiming that Gotti was wrong on a lot of things. Despite these sharp words, Ruggiero spoke fondly of Gotti, describing him as a brother, and even admitting to a certain affection for him. Ruggiero, while often critical, was known as one of Gotti's biggest supporters, frequently boosting his ego and standing by him in public. In an unexpected twist, Ruggiero would later assume a fatherly role for Gotti's son, John Gotti Jr., whom he came to regard as an uncle, despite no formal familial ties through blood or marriage. Their bond reflected the deep, complex relationships that existed within the tight-knit Gotti circle. While the Ruggiero and Gotti families shared long-standing ties, things took a turn when Peter Gotti and John Gotti Jr. rose to power as bosses of the Gambino crime family. In a surprising move, Ruggiero's son, Angelo Ruggiero Jr., and his nephew, Salvatore Ruggiero Jr., were not inducted into the ranks of made men, a status that had once been granted to Ruggiero's father, John Gotti, by his uncle Della Croce. This oversight was likely a result of the legal troubles Angelo Ruggiero Sr. had brought upon the family. particularly after his home had been tapped by the FBI and the Justice Department, which caused significant strain on the Gambino crime family and its operations. Mob associate Wilfred Johnson's grudge against Angelo Ruggiero ran deep, though the reasons behind this animosity remain uncertain. While several members of the Bergen crew had questionable relationships, Johnson's contempt for Ruggiero stood out. Unlike other informants, Johnson seemed exceptionally driven to undermine Ruggiero's position, often disparaging him as that fat fuck. Johnson's role as an informant was complex and selective. Although he provided the FBI with a wealth of information on the Bergen crew, he deliberately shielded certain figures, particularly John Gotti, from his revelations. When questioned about the crew's drug activities, Johnson claimed ignorance, but agents suspected he was holding back critical details to protect Gotti. Despite this, Johnson took extraordinary steps in aiding the FBI's investigation into Ruggiero. He handed over precise floor plans of Ruggiero's home in Cedarhurst, New York, pinpointing the best locations for agents to plant wiretaps. With Johnson's assistance, the FBI installed a surveillance device in 1982, leading to one of the most revealing recordings ever captured. These tapes are now regarded as a rare insight into the inner workings of organized crime at the time, exposing layers of conspiracy and criminal activity within the Gambino family. Ruggiero's criminal entanglements eventually led to more deadly outcomes. In one instance, he collaborated with Johnson and John Gotti to carry out the murder of Anthony Plate, a Gambino family street soldier, on behalf of Gotti's uncle, Agnello Della Croce, in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. This violent act was one of many that underscored the dangerous alliances and betrayals within the underworld, highlighting the volatile nature of loyalty and revenge in organized crime. Based on testimony from FBI informants Wilfred Johnson, James Cardinale, Mark Ryder, and George Yudzevich, the FBI's Gambino squad in Queens, New York, received clearance from the U.S. Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., to seek a wiretap order on the home phone of Angelo Ruggiero, a prominent figure in organized crime. This approval, granted on November 9, 1981, marked the start of a deep investigation initially aimed at loan sharking and illegal gambling operations. However, as the surveillance continued, the agents uncovered evidence pointing towards heroin trafficking, a much more severe offense within the underworld. The wiretapped phone in Ruggiero's residence was listed under his daughter, Princess Ruggiero, as he had confidently informed contacts it was safe from prying ears. Yet, just a few months after a wiretap on a separate operation in Queens was executed, Ruggiero began to discuss illegal gambling and loan sharking activities openly on the line. He revealed details of the rackets run by himself, John Gotti, and Gene Gotti, unknowingly providing investigators with key insights into their operations. In the affidavit for the wiretap, the FBI also named Peter Gotti and Richard Gotti as enforcers who collected debts for loan sharking ventures. The affidavit described Ruggiero as a known murderer, indicating a readiness to use extreme violence against any debtor who failed to meet his demands. These accusations, documented in federal filings, highlighted the ruthless nature of Ruggiero's tactics. As Ruggiero eventually learned about the FBI's surveillance, he went into hiding, aware of the severe consequences that awaited him if he continued his phone conversations. This revelation sent shockwaves through the internal ranks of the Gambino crime family, particularly within the factions loyal to Paul Castellano, the family's boss. Castellano had enforced a strict prohibition on drug dealing among his members, punishing violations with a death sentence. The news of the wiretap sparked widespread fear and distrust, threatening to destabilize the delicate balance between the Della Croce Gotti faction and Castellano's loyalists. In late June 1985, the Bergen crew made a startling breakthrough, proving its ability to gather highly sensitive information. Crew member Angelo Ruggiero got his hands on a revealing document, a compiled version of the last of the FBI's 6 electronic surveillance affidavits focused on him. The document hinted at vulnerabilities within the FBI's strategy and indicated that Agent John Conroy, who appeared central to the investigation, might not be as formidable as he seemed. Additionally, attorney Michael Coiro's influence over the Eastern District appeared less secure than he likely believed. Most critically, these FBI records exposed just how deep the agency's probe ran, confirming that they had installed 3 surveillance devices in Ruggiero's home to listen in on his activities. Upon realizing this, Ruggiero became increasingly fearful. He had been hiding critical information from his powerful associates, Paul Castellano and his uncle Agnello Della Croce. For some time, Ruggiero assured them he wasn't independently involved in drug deals. He claimed he was merely tying up loose ends from his late brother Salvatore's narcotics business. In truth, he had his own hand in these illicit operations. By December 1, 1984, the FBI's wiretap on Ruggiero's home was disconnected when he relocated from Howard Beach, Queens to Cedarhurst, New York, where he was renovating a new residence. Confident that the move would allow him to slip under the FBI's radar, Ruggiero told close informants it was a strategic decision. However, the FBI's surveillance continued to close in. Pen registers at the Our Friends Social Club recorded numerous calls to Ruggiero's new address, tipping off agents to his location. On moving day, FBI agents were already on the scene, tightening their physical surveillance on Ruggiero and his associate John Gotti, who were suspected of active drug trafficking. Despite Ruggiero's mounting paranoia and his attempts to speak in coded language, evidence of his drug-related activities continued to pile up. His recorded conversations with known traffickers such as Alphonse Siska and Arnold Scittieri provided the FBI with a growing body of incriminating evidence, adding weight to their suspicions that Ruggiero was deeply entrenched in the narcotics trade. On April 17, 1984, Ruggiero had a pivotal meeting with a man named Jack Conroy, an associate who claimed he had a reliable inside source at the local telephone company. Conroy explained that this contact had access to confidential information about when phones were under legal surveillance. If tapped, Conroy promised, his source could uncover who authorized it. Ruggiero was intrigued but cautious. The following week, Conroy returned with an offer. His source would dig up the information for a fee of $800 to $1,000, with an additional $200 each for Conroy and his partner. Ruggiero accepted the deal without hesitation, thinking it would be money well spent. Within days, Conroy returned with the results. He explained that the taps on Ruggiero's lines were indeed legal, supported by a March 18th federal court order from the Southern District of New York, covering Manhattan and the Bronx. The news left Ruggiero wondering if he was merely a secondary target in a larger investigation aimed at someone else. But to cover his bases, he told Conroy he would gather additional phone numbers for him to check. Conroy reassured him, acting as if he was prepared to help further. Unknown to Ruggiero, however, Jack Conroy wasn't who he claimed to be. He was in fact an undercover FBI agent posing as a telephone repairman, weaving a carefully crafted deception. Despite the warning signs, Ruggiero appeared unconcerned about the looming indictments. So confident was he in his safety that he poured $40,000 into renovations on his home in Cedarhurst, dismissing the surveillance as a bunch of bullshit. He was even overheard bragging that nothing is coming. His confidence would soon prove to be misplaced, leaving even his closest associates surprised by how mistaken he had been. After Paul Castellano was arrested on charges of racketeering and other crimes, he made a disturbing discovery. The FBI had managed to bug his home, and the legal basis for their surveillance was tapes linked to his associate, Angelo Ruggiero. These recordings, known as the Ruggiero tapes, contained crucial evidence that implicated Castellano. Furious, Castellano demanded access to these tapes and went straight to his underboss, Agnello Della Croce, who was also Ruggiero's uncle, to insist that Ruggiero hand them over. Della Croce, caught in the middle, tried to diffuse the tension. He explained that Ruggiero was deeply opposed to sharing the tapes, claiming they held numerous private, even embarrassing conversations that Ruggiero didn't want anyone to hear. Della Croce argued that Ruggiero's reluctance wasn't a question of disloyalty. It was simply a matter of personal pride and self-preservation. Ruggiero was also battling legal troubles of his own and wanted to avoid handing over any evidence that could be used against him in the upcoming 1985 Mafia Commission trial. He maintained his stance firmly, refusing to budge even when his uncle urged him to reconsider. He reportedly told his lawyers, "If you give up those tapes, I'll kill you." Sammy Gravano, a key figure in the Mafia, later reflected on the fallout from the tapes. According to Gravano, Ruggiero's big mouth had essentially opened the door for the FBI to target Castellano directly. "He's caught on tape all over the place," Gravano recalled, talking about things he had no business mentioning. Those tapes turned out to be a big problem. He went on to explain that while the tapes played a role in Castellano's eventual downfall, resentment against Castellano within the family was also reaching a boiling point. When the time came, that discontent influenced Gravano, Frank DeSico, and others in their decision to support action against Castellano. At that moment, Gravano continued, the tapes were Ruggiero's problem, not mine. I wasn't involved, wasn't recorded on them in any way. It was all on Angie and ultimately John Gotti and Paul. This messy conflict over the Ruggiero tapes illustrates the complexity of Mafia loyalty and the explosive potential of unchecked talk. Ruggiero's refusal to cooperate, fueled by a combination of pride and defiance, set off a chain of events that escalated tensions and widened divides within the organization. In June 1986, Ruggiero successfully arranged the murder of Gambino crime family capo Robert DiBernardo. Ruggiero started talking subversively about DiBernardo. After the botched murder of Lucchese crime family mobster Anthony Casso, who was a soldier at the time, Casso openly called Ruggiero an idiot. Insulted, Ruggiero decided to have Casso murdered, a task entrusted to Michael Paradiso, one of John Gotti's oldest friends. Paradiso, in turn, assigned the actual task of killing to 3 hoodlums, including a Staten Island thug named James Heidel, a nephew of Gambino crime family capo Daniel Marino. Heidel shot Casso 5 times but failed to kill him, a mistake that proved costly. Kidnapped by Stephen Caracappa and Louis Ippolito, Heidel was hideously tortured by Anthony Casso for 12 hours, then killed, all as a warning to Ruggiero. The incident further rattled Gotti's faith in Ruggiero's abilities as a capo and created a major managerial problem. As family boss, Gotti was being ushered into the great riches of the upper-level rackets, ones that required captains with some intelligence and business sense who could help him run the organization. Ruggiero proved to have none of these attributes. After the attempted shooting of Anthony Casso, John Gotti Jr. later stated that Ruggiero was placed on the shelf for ordering the attack. Despite orders from his father, John Jr. continued his friendship with his father's old friend and spoke to him regularly. When Ruggiero received word that his brother, Salvatore, had perished in a plane crash, he joined Gene Gotti and John Carniglia on a tense visit to Salvatore's secluded spot in Franklin Lakes, New Jersey. Their goal, to recover a hidden stash of heroin and cash that Salvatore had left behind. But unbeknownst to Ruggiero, the FBI's Gambino squad had already targeted him in their quest to build a case against the elusive John Gotti. Hoping to gather evidence, federal agents had outfitted Ruggiero's Cedarhurst home with wiretaps and hidden microphones, strategically placing them in his kitchen, den, and dining room. The surveillance captured an unexpected breakthrough: Ruggiero's lawyer, Michael Coiro, offering his condolences and then disclosing to him Gene found the heroin. This casual mention of heroin, especially right after Salvatore's death, instantly piqued the interest of the FBI. Suddenly, Ruggiero's ties to the Gotti family seemed more incriminating, and investigators saw a potential path to indictments against higher-ranking Gambino family members. Ruggiero's own reputation as a notorious talker, earning him the nickname Quack Quack for his constant chatter, worked against him. Almost everyone who crossed his path endured his unfiltered gossip, complaints, and indiscretions, all of which he often shared without hesitation. The loss of Salvatore hit Ruggiero hard, and the FBI wiretaps captured him grieving openly with his associates, Gerlando Ciastia and Joseph Lopresti, 2 of his close partners in the drug trade. Unlike Salvatore, who had built an empire from drug trafficking and amassed millions, Ruggiero never climbed beyond the level of a wealthy streetwise mobster. In a poignant moment, he confided to Lopresti, "You know, I lost my brother. I told myself, I have to get drunk. I had 2 vodkas, went to my room, shut the door, and I cried." The surveillance also captured Ruggiero lamenting how difficult it was to accept his brother's violent end, as the crash had left Salvatore's body in fragments. "If he'd just been shot in the head and left in the street, that's part of our life, I could accept that," he added, reflecting on the brutality he had grown accustomed to, yet couldn't reconcile with this tragic loss. These raw, deeply personal moments revealed not only Ruggiero's pain, but also the extent of his involvement in the criminal underworld. A portrait of a man entangled in loyalty, family, and the life of a mobster that FBI agents listened to intently, hoping to uncover the secrets he tried but couldn't keep. From behind bars, Gotti orchestrated a series of deadly moves that would change the hierarchy of the Gambino family. One key target was Robert DiBernardo, who had found himself in direct conflict with Angelo Ruggiero as both men competed to fill the role of underboss after Frank DeSico's death. Tensions rose when Ruggiero accused DiBernardo of undermining Gotti's authority, leading Gotti to assign the hit on DiBernardo to his trusted right-hand man, Sammy Gravano. But it didn't stop there. Ruggiero's own volatile behavior in court quickly backfired. His bail was revoked after several abrasive outbursts during preliminary hearings. Frustrated by Ruggiero's actions and lack of self-control, Gotti decided to promote Joseph Armone to the position of underboss instead. Meanwhile, Ruggiero was embroiled in a high-stakes federal case alongside Gene Gotti and John Carniglia, charged with heroin trafficking. The trials were chaotic. Mistrials were declared not once but twice due to suspected jury tampering. Ruggiero, unable to secure bail, remained in federal custody until the third trial began in 1989, by which time he was severely ill with terminal lung cancer. Eventually, his associates, Gene Gotti and Carniglia, faced a grim fate. They were both convicted and received 50-year sentences. As the law tightened its grip, Ruggiero's reputation took a further hit. Word spread that the FBI had recorded his conversations, sparking John Gotti's fury and leading him to consider a final act of betrayal, a hit on Ruggiero himself. However, Gravano intervened, reasoning that Ruggiero's cancer left him no threat. Gotti conceded, but stripped Ruggiero of his title as capo regime and cut him off from all family operations, effectively exiling him from the underworld. In the end, Ruggiero's career in organized crime came to a slow, quiet end. Not in a hail of bullets, but in isolation. A powerful lesson on loyalty, loss, and the shifting allegiances within the Mafia's brutal ranks. After turning state's evidence to avoid prosecution, former underboss Gravano reported that during the last months of Ruggiero's life, both he and Gene Gotti urged John to visit his near-death childhood friend. Gotti refused to see his once loyal soldier and friend because he was still angry over Ruggiero's criminal activities being recorded on wiretaps. On Monday, December 4, 1989, Angelo Ruggiero died of cancer in Howard Beach, Queens, at the age of 49 years. His son and namesake, Angelo Ruggiero Jr. and Ruggiero Sr. His paternal nephew, Salvatore Ruggiero Jr., would later follow their fathers into an organized crime career. Angelo Jr. was convicted of grand larceny in May 1998 and sent to prison for 1 to 3 years. Under Gotti's leadership, with Ruggiero as a trusted lieutenant, the Gambino family entered a new era marked by high-profile crimes and an unprecedented level of media attention. Gotti's flamboyant style and Ruggiero's close ties to him helped to popularize the image of the Mafia as both glamorous and violent, which ultimately drew greater attention from law enforcement. Ruggiero's boldness and lack of caution, however, made him a target for the FBI. His involvement in drug trafficking and his tendency to talk openly about criminal activities led to him being wiretapped extensively. These tapes would later be used as evidence against the Gambino family, causing significant damage to their operations. Ruggiero's downfall began with the release of these wiretapped conversations. The FBI captured hours of audio in which Ruggiero discussed drug deals, murders, and other criminal activities. These recordings became key evidence in multiple Mafia trials, including the one that eventually convicted Gotti. Ironically, Ruggiero's close friendship with Gotti, which had been his greatest asset, also became his downfall as he faced legal trouble alongside the boss. Ruggiero's legacy in the American Mafia is a complex one. While he was a fiercely loyal and respected figure within the Gambino family, his recklessness also contributed to the downfall of both himself and his closest allies. His wiretapped conversations revealed much about the inner workings of the Mafia and provided law enforcement with the evidence needed to prosecute high-ranking members. Ruggiero's life is a testament to the dangers of the Mafia lifestyle, where loyalty and ambition are often overshadowed by betrayal and criminal consequences. His story remains an important chapter in the history of organized crime in America.
When Paul Castellano wanted those tapes, if you listen to the tape, they always play where he says, "I'm not giving up those tapes." There's friends of mine on those tapes.
I'm gonna tell you something. If you two never bother with me again in the rest of my life, I ain't giving them tapes. I can't. There's good friends of mine on the face. Well, he's the boss. You have to do what he tells you.
That's why I said to you before, you don't understand what the husband is. Not your means, but the boss is your boss. You understand?
Because he knew if he gave those tapes up, other people were going to get implicated on selling heroin, and a lot of other people would have got hurt because Paul was against heroin trafficking.
Who all do you think was on those tapes?
Probably everybody, except my father and Tony Lee. They're the only two people I know definitely didn't sell heroin. You know, listen, everybody was selling heroin, everybody. So who was on those tapes? Probably Eddie Lino, probably, you know, other wise guys, that Frankie DeChico, probably everybody was on those tapes that were wise guys or captains, and he wouldn't give them up because Paul would have, if he was going to kill one of them, he couldn't pick and choose who he was going to. Once he knew all these guys were selling heroin, he couldn't pick and choose which one he was going to kill. If you don't kill them all, you can't kill any of them.